Mom! Lyra's voice, small and frightened, reached her ears, and Zyra's heart tightened in her chest. Her daughter, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, clutched the edges of her chair, wide eyes filled with terror. Despite everything, Zyra forced a reassuring smile. It's going to be okay, Lyra, she lied, voice strained but soft. Just stay with me. We'll get through this. But she knew their chances were slim. They had been running for too long, too far, and the damage to their ship was beyond her ability to fix. Their fuel reserves were gone, their engines barely functioning. And behind them, always behind them, the enemy pursued relentlessly. Zyra glanced at the monitors. The Mornax ships were still visible in the distance, dark shadows that had been closing in ever since they left the wreckage of their homeworld. The Mornax, the species responsible for the complete annihilation of their civilization, a race with no mercy, no compassion, and no limits to their cruelty. Zyra's heart ached as she thought of the countless lives lost, her people erased from existence, their planet reduced to smoldering ruins. She had once been a diplomat, a voice for peace among the stars, but now, all she was left with was survival. Survival and Lyra. The ship shook again, and this time, a deafening crack split the air as a vital piece of machinery exploded at the rear. They were losing altitude fast, spiraling toward the surface of the desolate planet below. Zyra's hands moved quickly, adjusting the controls, trying to soften the landing. "Hold on!" she shouted. The crash was brutal. Metal screeched against rock, and the ship skidded across the barren landscape before coming to a bone-jarring halt. Silence followed. Zyra's head was spinning. Blood trickled down from a cut on her forehead, but she barely felt it. For a moment, everything was still. Slowly, she turned her head to check on Lyra. "Lyra? Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Lyra coughed but nodded, her small face pale and streaked with tears. "I'm okay," she whispered. Zyra exhaled, relief washing over her. But it was short-lived. The cold, harsh reality of their situation pressed down on her like a crushing weight. They were stranded. The ship was beyond repair, and the planet they had landed on was as lifeless as the void of space itself. Jagged mountains loomed in the distance, and the sky above was a dark, oppressive gray. There was no sign of vegetation, no signs of life at all. The wind howled through the broken hull of their ship, and the atmosphere, though breathable, was thin and frigid. Zyra knew they wouldn't last long here. Their supplies were minimal, and with the ship's systems offline, there would be no way to call for help. Not that anyone would come. Everyone who might have answered was already dead. She stood shakily, testing her balance, and moved to the control panel. Most of the instruments were shattered, but a small emergency screen flickered faintly. It was enough to confirm what she already knew: they had crash-landed in the middle of nowhere, on a planet that had never been charted. Their chances of survival were slim, but Zyra couldn't let herself think about that now. She had to stay focused, for Lyra. "I'll go check outside," Zyra said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Don't leave me," Lyra pleaded, her voice quivering. Zyra knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her daughter's cheek. "I won't go far, I promise. I just need to make sure it's safe. You stay here and keep warm. I'll be right back." Lyra nodded, but there was fear in her eyes that cut through Zyra's heart. She had tried so hard to shield her daughter from the horrors of their situation, but the truth was impossible to hide now. There was no safety, no certainty. They were alone. Stepping out of the wreckage, Zyra surveyed the landscape. It was as desolate as she had feared. Sharp rocks jutted from the ground like the bones of some ancient beast, and a bitter wind stung her skin. She could see no signs of civilization, no sign that this planet had ever been touched by life. But something felt off. Zyra couldn't explain it. There was a strange hum in the air, something almost imperceptible, as if the planet itself was alive, watching them. She shivered, pulling her tattered jacket closer around her. The sensation was unnerving, but she pushed it aside. Right now, the only thing that mattered was survival. Returning to the ship, Lyra found Lyra staring out of the broken viewport, her face calm but distant. It wasn't the frightened expression of a child lost in despair. Instead, it was something deeper, something Lyra couldn't quite understand. "Mom," Lyra said softly as Lyra approached. "There's something here. I can feel it." Lyra frowned, kneeling beside her. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lyra's eyes were wide, reflecting the dim light from the emergency lamps. "I don't know, it's like the planet is talking to me. I can feel something moving out there." Lyra's stomach twisted. Was this just a child's imagination, a coping mechanism for the trauma they'd been through? Or was it something else? There had always been something special about Lyra, even before the war, before the destruction. Little things, small occurrences that couldn't be explained. Objects moving without cause, lights flickering when she was upset. Lyra had always dismissed it, chalking it up to coincidences. But now, in the quiet darkness of this dead planet, she couldn't shake the feeling that Lyra's words were more than just childish fantasy. "I believe you," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. "We'll figure this out together, okay?" But in her heart, Lyra felt the cold weight of hopelessness. They were alone, stranded on a desolate world with no way out, no way to fight back against the enemies that would soon be upon them. She knew it was only a matter of time before the Mornaks found them. And when they did, there would be no mercy. For now, all they could do was wait. Lyra closed her eyes, leaning her head against the cold metal of the wreckage, feeling Lyra's small body warm against her. There was no one left to save them. No one left at all. And yet, somewhere deep within, a flicker of hope remained. For the sake of her daughter, she would hold on to that fragile thread, no matter how thin it seemed. The vast emptiness of space stretched out in every direction, cold and unfeeling. The human pilot, faceless behind the visor of his helmet, sat in the cockpit of his small exploration vessel, observing the silent beauty of the stars. He wasn't a soldier, not a hero in the traditional sense. His mission wasn't conquest or defense, but discovery. His curiosity had always driven him beyond the borders of known space, seeking answers to questions no one else had thought to ask. He wanted to explore the unknown, to uncover mysteries hidden in the void, and to push the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. But today, something different caught his attention. A faint, erratic signal flashed on his console, an old distress beacon, barely functional. It was alien, and judging by the frequency, likely from a ship that had been stranded for some time. His instincts told him to proceed with caution, but he wasn't the type to turn away from those in need. The signal, weak and fading, called to him, and without hesitation, he adjusted his course toward it. As he approached the source of the signal, a planet came into view, a desolate, barren world with no signs of civilization. The distress beacon originated from a crashed ship near the planet's surface, and his sensors quickly identified the wreckage as alien. He had no way of knowing what or who he might find there, but the possibility of survivors, however slim, was enough to make him descend. The moment he landed, he surveyed the scene with quick efficiency. The wreckage was extensive, the ship shattered into twisted metal, the kind of destruction that told him the crash had been anything but gentle. Moving swiftly but cautiously, he approached, his boots crunching over the brittle surface of the planet. His visor displayed real-time data, scanning for life signs. There, buried under debris, faint heat signatures caught his attention. 2 of them. He began working quickly, his hands moving with practiced precision as he cleared the wreckage. Beneath the twisted metal, he found them. An alien woman, her body bruised and bleeding, barely clinging to consciousness. Beside her, a young child, trembling but alive, staring up at him with wide, terrified eyes. The woman tried to speak, her voice hoarse and weak, but collapsed as he carefully lifted her free. The human's mind went into action mode. His training kicked in. His first priority was stabilizing them, ensuring they had a chance. His portable medical kit was basic, but with a few quick injections and bandaging of the worst wounds, he could buy them time. He worked efficiently, not wasting a second, applying first aid to the alien woman. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. The child, however, was conscious, watching him closely, her small body shivering under the thin fabric of her clothes. Kneeling beside the child, he pulled out a thermal blanket from his kit and gently wrapped it around her. He didn't speak, knowing that whatever language barrier existed could complicate communication, but he offered her water and food from his rations. She hesitated at first, eyes flicking between him and her mother, but something about his calm demeanor seemed to reassure her. Slowly, she took a sip from the water pouch, her small hands shaking. "Suri," the alien mother stirred, a weak groan escaping her lips. She blinked, her vision blurry, and the first thing she saw was the human bending over her daughter. Panic flared in her chest, and she struggled to sit up, her mind immediately going to the worst-case scenario. In her delirium, she didn't know who or what this human was. The Mornax had left her paranoid, distrustful. Instinctively, she reached out to shield her daughter, but her body was too weak to resist. The human raised a hand, palms open in a gesture of peace. He moved slowly, offering her some of the water and pointing to the bandages he had already applied to her wounds. Despite her suspicion, Suri realized he wasn't there to harm them. She was too exhausted to do anything but accept his help. Slowly, she took a drink, her body desperately needing the hydration. Yara, the child, was already drawn to the human. Though she didn't fully understand why, she sensed something about him, a warmth, a safety she hadn't felt since the destruction of their home. Her mother might have been cautious, but Yara was different. There was a bond forming, subtle but real. The human, satisfied that they were stable for the moment, turned his attention to the wreckage. Their ship was beyond repair, but there might be components he could salvage. His experience as an explorer had taught him to be resourceful, to make use of whatever he had. As he moved through the debris, he quickly realized just how advanced this alien technology was. It was far beyond anything he had encountered before, yet with his tools and skills, he began to patch together makeshift solutions. Suri watched him work, still wary but grateful. It had been so long since she had seen another being willing to help without asking for something in return. She was still weak, but she managed to sit up, cradling Yara protectively. As the human worked, she found her voice, though it was strained. Why are you helping us?" she asked, her language unfamiliar to him but the meaning clear through the tone and the look in her eyes. He paused for a moment, turning to face her. There was no need for words. His actions spoke for themselves. It wasn't about reward or recognition, it was simply what he did. Humanity had always been about pushing limits, not just physically but morally. They helped, they explored, they survived. His answer, though silent, resonated through his actions. Over time, as he continued working on repairs, Suri began to tell him their story, her voice soft and halting. She spoke of the Mornax, of the destruction of their civilization, the endless chase that had led them to this barren world. The human listened, not interrupting, but absorbing every detail. His mind worked silently, calculating their chances, considering options. He knew they couldn't stay here. The Mornax would likely come searching for the wreckage soon, and this planet, desolate as it was, wasn't safe. As Suri spoke, he noted how she struggled to stay composed, to be strong for Yara. It reminded him of something, perhaps his own past, though he didn't dwell on it. The human had always been the silent type, more action than words. His backstory was vague even to himself now, but the core of who he was had remained. He was a survivor, a protector, and he wasn't about to leave this mother and child to fend for themselves. The repairs weren't going to make the alien ship fly again, but he managed to get enough systems online to access the remaining power cells and scavenged what he could. As he worked, his mind was already formulating a plan. There was no question in his mind, they had to leave. The Mornax were too dangerous, and it was only a matter of time before they tracked the wreckage. Suri's heart raced as she kept Yara close by her side, her protective instincts flaring stronger with each passing moment. She knew what the Mornax were capable of. She had seen it firsthand. Her mind flashed back to the destruction of their home planet, the cold, calculated annihilation of her people. The thought of the Mornax reaching Yara sent a chill through her. They couldn't be allowed to capture her daughter. There was too much at stake. The human had already secured the ship for departure, the engines humming softly, ready for the impending escape. As he adjusted the controls, he glanced over at Yara. Something had shifted in the air around her. She stood still, unnaturally still for a child in such a tense moment. Her eyes were wide, but there was a peculiar glow to them now, a faint shimmer that seemed to flicker with an energy that was impossible to miss. Yara, unaware of the attention, seemed drawn to something beyond the physical. The approaching Mornax vessel seemed to resonate with her, its malevolent presence stirring something deep inside her. Suri noticed it too. It wasn't the first time she had seen such strange behavior in her daughter, but this was different. More intense. The glow in Yara's eyes grew brighter, and as it did, small objects in the ship around them began to shift, tools sliding across the floor, wires vibrating as if pulled by an unseen force. Yara? Suri's voice was soft but filled with concern. She reached out to touch her daughter, but Yara's focus was distant, locked on something that neither her mother nor the human could fully understand. The human turned his attention away from the controls for a moment, watching as the strange energy continued to pulse through the ship. This wasn't normal. It wasn't just fear or adrenaline. Something deeper was at work. He had seen enough in his travels to know that some beings possessed extraordinary gifts, powers that defied explanation, but this was different. The scale of it, even in its subdued state, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. As the Mornax ship drew closer, Yara's body tensed, and a sudden surge of energy pulsed from her. It was faint but undeniable, a ripple of raw, unrefined power that caused the very walls of the ship to tremble. Suri took a step back, her eyes widening in shock. She had always known her daughter was different, but this was beyond her comprehension. The human, quick to react, placed himself between the ship's control panel and Yara. Whatever was happening, they needed to get off the planet now, before the Mornax realized they were there. He tapped a few commands into the console, and the ship began to lift off the ground, its engines roaring to life. But just as they broke through the planet's thin atmosphere, the Mornax vessel locked onto them, its menacing silhouette dominating the scanner. Suri's breath caught in her throat. They had been spotted. The human didn't hesitate. His hands flew across the controls, initiating a series of evasive maneuvers designed to shake off pursuit. The ship weaved through the emptiness of space, engines pushing to their limits as they fled. But the Mornax were relentless, their superior technology giving them an edge in the chase. Each time the human tried to break free, the Mornax closed the gap, their weapons systems powering up. It was only a matter of time before they would fire. Tension built as the ship's systems strained under the pressure. The human's jaw clenched in concentration, every second of delay bringing them closer to doom. Suri held Yara tightly, her heart pounding as the reality of their situation sank in. There was no outrunning them, not with the Mornax this close. Despair threatened to overtake her, but then she noticed Yara again. The strange energy was growing stronger, her eyes now glowing with an eerie intensity. Yara's breathing quickened, her small hands clenched into fists. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but the emotions swirling inside her, fear, desperation, the desire to protect her mother, were fueling something deep within her. The human caught sight of her as well, and for a brief moment, there was an unspoken understanding between him and Suri. Whatever this power was, it was their only chance. Suddenly, without warning, Yara's eyes flared with blinding light, and a massive pulse of energy erupted from her. It wasn't subtle this time. It was raw, untamed, and powerful. The energy wave shot out from the ship, expanding in all directions with impossible force. The human barely had time to shield his eyes before the pulse slammed into the pursuing Mornax vessel. The Mornax ship shuddered violently as the energy wave hit, its systems flickering, weapons going offline. For a moment, it hung in space, immobilized, before its engines sputtered and the ship began to drift, powerless. The human ship, shielded from the worst of the blast by its proximity to Lyra, surged forward, now free from pursuit. Zuri stared at her daughter, a mixture of awe and fear in her eyes. Lyra's body trembled with the aftershocks of the power she had just unleashed, her small frame barely able to contain it. She looked up at her mother, confused, scared, and exhausted. "I didn't mean to," Lyra whispered, her voice small, barely audible. Zuri knelt down beside her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay." But her mind raced with questions. What was this power? Where had it come from? And most importantly, how could they control it? The human, now back at the controls, glanced over his shoulder at them. He had seen many strange things in his time, but this was something beyond explanation. His mind worked quickly, processing what had just happened. The Mornax ship had been disabled, but they wouldn't stay that way for long. They needed a plan, somewhere safe where they could regroup and figure out how to deal with this new revelation. He looked at Zuri, then back at Lyra, the gravity of the situation settling in. This power could be their salvation, or it could be the thing that destroyed them all. It was clear now that Lyra was no ordinary child. Her abilities, if left unchecked, could change the course of the galaxy, either by freeing it from the Mornax or by unleashing chaos on an unimaginable scale. He turned back to the console, inputting new coordinates. There was a distant star system he knew of, a place far enough from Mornax's influence where they could lay low and figure out what to do next. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it would buy them time. "We need to move fast," the human said, his voice calm but urgent. "There's a place we can go, somewhere safe. We'll figure this out together." Beaten path, a refuge known only to a select few who dared venture beyond the mapped territories. It wasn't much, but it was safe, for now. Zuri leaned against the window, exhaustion heavy in her eyes but a faint glimmer of hope sparking for the first time in what felt like years. Lyra sat beside her, her gaze distant, still processing everything that had happened. The last few days had been a blur, and the power she had unleashed back on the planet still buzzed in the air between them, unspoken but ever present. When the ship finally touched down, the human turned to face them. His words were few, but his presence had already become a source of calm for both mother and daughter. The bond that had formed between the three of them was unspoken but undeniable. He stepped out of the cockpit and began preparing the ship for a longer stay, running checks and initiating repairs, his movements steady and confident. There was no need for conversation. They all understood the gravity of their situation. The sanctuary itself was a modest outpost, functional, isolated, and hidden from the rest of the galaxy. It was a place designed for quiet survival, far from the chaos of war or the political machinations of the galaxy's powerful factions. The human had been here before, and though it wasn't meant for long-term stays, it provided the perfect cover for now. The Mornax would not find them here easily, giving them a much-needed respite from the endless running. As they stepped off the ship and into the quiet expanse of the sanctuary, Zuri could feel the weight lifting from her shoulders, if only a little. She glanced at Lyra, who had been unusually quiet since their escape. Her daughter was always quiet, but now it was different. She could sense the turmoil in Lyra, the confusion, the fear, the uncertainty of her own abilities. Zuri felt it too. What Lyra had done back there, the sheer power she had unleashed, had saved them, but it had also left a lingering question: how much more power lay within her? The human worked diligently on repairs, the rhythmic clinking of tools against metal offering a strange comfort in the stillness. As the hours passed, Zuri found herself watching him more closely, not with suspicion, but with growing appreciation. He had saved them, more than once, and not just through his skill or technology, but through something deeper. It was his calm determination, his silent resolve, and the quiet humanity that had come to represent a beacon of hope for them both. Zuri, who had once mistrusted all but her own people, found herself trusting this stranger completely. Lyra, too, had grown attached to him. She would often sit close by as he worked, her small hands sometimes reaching out to touch the strange human tools he used, her curiosity piqued. There was something about him that made her feel safe, even as the weight of her newfound power bore down on her. She didn't understand it yet, but she trusted him, and that trust began to form the foundation of what would come next. The human eventually finished his repairs for the day, and as evening settled over the sanctuary, they gathered around a makeshift table inside the small outpost. It was the first real moment of peace they'd had in what felt like an eternity. Zuri watched Yara closely, noting how her daughter's expression had shifted from fear to quiet contemplation. The glow in her eyes, which had once frightened Zuri, now seemed subdued, as if Yara herself was learning to control it, bit by bit. Later that night, while Yara slept, Zuri found herself standing beside the human, watching the stars through the outpost's small viewport. She didn't know how to express the gratitude she felt, the relief of having someone else to share the burden, even if just for a little while. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking the silence. "For everything." He didn't respond with words, only a brief nod. It was enough. But there was a question Zuri couldn't ignore any longer. Do you think we can control it? Her power, I mean." The human considered her words for a moment. He had seen enough of the galaxy to know that power like Yara's didn't come without risks, but he had also seen the resilience of those who harness such gifts. "It will take time," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. "But with the right guidance, yes, I think she can learn." Zuri exhaled, feeling a small flicker of hope. For so long, she had feared that Yara's power would be their undoing, but now, standing here with this human who had risked everything to save them, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for them beyond running and hiding. In the days that followed, they began to experiment with Yara's abilities. The human took the lead, guiding her gently, showing her how to focus, how to channel her emotions into controlled energy. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Yara became frustrated or overwhelmed, but the human's patience never wavered. Slowly, she started to gain control, learning to tap into her power without letting it consume her. Zuri watched every moment, her heart swelling with pride and fear in equal measure. But as Yara's control improved, so did the understanding of what her power truly meant. The Mornax were still out there, a relentless force determined to eradicate the last of Zuri's people. Yara's abilities, though still unrefined, could very well be the key to stopping them once and for all. But with that realization came the darker possibility. What if Yara's power wasn't just a tool for defense? What if it became a weapon, something that could be used to bring devastation on a scale even the Mornax couldn't imagine? Zuri voiced her concerns one evening, her gaze fixed on the stars. What if it's too much? What if she loses control? The human didn't answer immediately. He understood the weight of Zuri's fears, the potential for destruction that came with such power. But he also believed in Yara, in her kindness, her innocence. "It's not about the power itself," he said quietly. "It's about how she uses it. She's not alone anymore. She has you. She has me." That simple statement eased some of the burden in Zuri's heart. They weren't alone. For the first time in years, she felt the faintest sense of unity, of hope that they could face the future together, no matter what it held.